I am here with Dov Baron, who is the headline speaker for global conferences on leadership. He is an interactive presenter. He's got a style that captivates and energizes, and he is fascinating to watch. He's a revolutionary thinker with a communication style that Inc. magazine listed as the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. He is everywhere. He has advised the United Nations. He writes for CNN, CBS, SHRM. I mean, the list is so long, I would spend the whole day just listing it. But it's so nice to have you here, Dov.
Thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, I didn't realize you were in Canada till we just started to say hello a minute ago. And is that your home, or have you just recently moved there? Or
no, this is my base. I've lived here longer than I lived anywhere else in the world. But as you can probably tell from my Labradoodle accent, I'm not from here. I came here from Australia, where I lived for many years. And before that, I was in Asia and Indonesia. Before that, I lived in New Brunswick in East Coast Canada. Before that, I was in France and Italy. And I was born in the UK. So that's why it's a Labradoodle accent.
So you had pretty not too interesting life, it sounds like, yeah.
I just was pretty bored and I watched a lot of TV.
Well, I have loved watching your videos. I've been going through some of your past presentations, and you are extremely dynamic. I was watching the audience; they're just captivated by every word, and it's really fun to watch your videos. I loved it. You're welcome. And I know you have your site as the Full Monty Leadership is your name for it. Can you give me a little background on how you came up with that?
Yeah, actually, it's a very interesting, because I was sitting down with a very good friend of mine who was a mentor at the time, and we were redesigning the platform that we have, and sort of he's really good at sort of drilling down and saying, listen, what is it that people would say about you? And so we did a lot of research, asked a lot of questions on what do people say? How do you describe Dov? How do you describe the way he is? And we'd get answers like, Dov is the real deal. Dov doesn't pull punches, and those kinds of things. And at the other side, Dov is deeply loving and caring and compassionate and empathetic. We were very confused by it. And I just started saying to people, if you could just say it in the simplest way, what would it be? And he said, no bullshit, and doesn't take any. So what do you mean? He said, he just asks you to be as real as he is going to be real. And so we had that conversation, and my friend and I were talking about a movie we'd seen a few years before, which was called Full Monty. Mm-hmm. And it was about, as you probably remember, it was a great funny film about a bunch of poor English guys who ended up going full Monty in order to make a living and stripping everything off. And that is the essence of what the leadership style is that I teach, is leading without the cover, leading without the status, leading without all that stuff we do that we hide behind. Let's get really naked and reveal ourselves for the truth of who we are and the message that we've got to deliver. And that's what makes the impact. That's what connects us together.
Well, what is your background that you got to this point that you know so much to help people with their leadership style? You're a culture expert. You talk about millennials. I was looking at all the different things, listening to the things you said. Can you just give me a background? Because I'm sure people will be interested in that.
I don't think we have that long.
Well, give me the Reader's Digest first.
Reader's Digest, the Coles Notes version. The truth is that I started out traveling the world. The reason I was traveling so much was because I wanted to study different philosophies. That was my thing. Mm-hmm. And I studied Vedanta, which is Hindu philosophy, Kabbalah, which is Jewish philosophy, Gnostic Christianity, Buddhism, and the Tao. Those were the main ones that I studied. When I studied all those things, I was deeply immersed in all of that and got really irritated with people who could tell me which way my chakra was spinning, but they couldn't hold a job, and they certainly couldn't hold a relationship. So I was kind of fascinated by that, and I started studying psychology to understand that, and that led me into the psychology of excellence. In '84, I stumbled into quantum physics and started studying that. I became a counselor, I became a therapist because of all those backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Combined that with the leadership and excellence studying, that was kind of where it all came from, this deep understanding of psychology. And so I wrote a dissertation on quantum physics, metaphysics, and psychology, and the intersection between them. So it really helps you understand how people work individually and collectively, what happens when we come together as our tribe.
Wow, that's quite an interesting background. I wrote my dissertation on emotional intelligence, so I'm very interested in these psychological aspects and personality aspects in leadership. And so I was fascinated by your talks about millennials, because
Yes.
there is a disconnect sometimes between the different generations of what each group expects. And you said that millennials don't trust big business and they change careers, jobs faster. And so what do we need to know about millennials that for people who are not millennials to make sure that we understand how to get along?
Number one thing to learn about millennials is this: they are awesome. I love millennials. I describe them as baby boomers with balls. And what I mean by that, I don't mean to insult anybody, but what I mean by that is that as baby boomers, we all said we're never going to work for the man. And when we all became the man. Mm-hmm. And what I love about millennials is they have the same basic core values that we've forgotten, in that they want to make a difference. Hippies wanted to make the difference. They wanted to change the world. Millennials do too. And that, we think of them as entitled. They're not entitled at all. They're actually people who deeply care about how we live, the world we live in. And they are very innovative. They're entrepreneurial minded. They're innovative minded. They learn fast, and they can teach us a lot. I think millennials rock, and you've got to do your best to really take the time to get to know them. It's very important for them to have cause. It's very important for them to have purpose-driven, meaningful work. And if you can bring that to them, they will serve you beyond anything you've ever imagined.
Well, how do you keep a millennial loyal if they pretty much anticipate moving around every few years? I mean, that's just what they do.
That's a great question, Diane. Mm-hmm. So one of the great challenges is that, and I wrote my last book on it, which was called Fiercely Loyal. This one here.
Great book, by the way.
Thank you. And it was about just that. In the millennials are changing jobs every 1.5 to 2 years. Now, when you think about when we entered the workforce, we being my generation, we were asked, what do you want to do? And it was a 20 to 40 year career question.
Right.
Well, millennials, it's a 4-year question. 10 times faster, they're changing careers. And so, first of all, understanding that if you're going to keep a millennial long-term, 4 years is long-term. And your ROI on them is 1.5 to 2 times their annual salary. So if you don't keep them for 2 years, you're losing money. What we do is we help you to keep them loyal. Now, what does it take? Again, meaningful work. You've got to give them meaningful work. They're entrepreneurial. So if you're inside of your company, create an entrepreneurial environment. So they're entrepreneurial inside your environment, adding to it. Make sure it's meaningful work, but make sure that you're a purpose-driven organization, that it's about something more than the money. That matters deeply to them, deeply. And be collaborative. So much of old school business is about competition and keeping the competition at a distance. No. Millennials want to collaborate with the competition, and they build great alliances. Once you do that, once you put those things in place, and then on top of all that, most importantly, is that you are a purpose-driven, authentic leader yourself. So one of the things I love about millennials is they have a bullshit meter the size of Spain. I mean, they're reading you. Mm-hmm. And so if you're pulling the wool over their eyes, they will walk away. They're not afraid to. Your organization is not their best and only alpha, and they know that. And I love that about them.
Well, that's really interesting because you talk a lot about purpose. You mentioned purpose. I was watching some of the audience members, how they reacted to wanting to know about their life purpose. Why do you think it's so important? I mean, do you think most people know what their life purpose is? And why do we need to know that?
It's a great question. There's a thing I do, and you've seen me do this in the audience, and that is that I ask the audience, how important do you think it might be to know your life's purpose, and how do you think it would affect your business? And everybody puts up their hand and says it's important. And then I ask, okay, how many of you know your life purpose? And usually it's about 20% of the audience. And then actually, and I've done this in workshops, if I actually asked that person who put their hand up and said yes, when I ask them what it is, they don't really know. So they kind of have an idea, but they don't really know. The interesting thing about life purpose is, this better than almost anybody, I'm sure, Diane, having done your dissertation on emotional intelligence, is that there's a place where we get success. But unfortunately, success is short-lived for all of us. Something happens, it's wonderful, you celebrate it, but then, the next thing, what's the next thing?
Right.
And then there's that place of purpose. And purpose is so much different because it gives us fulfillment. It adds that extra piece on the top. And so if you're looking at your life and you're successful and people look at you, this is who I mentor, work one-on-one with, when people look at you and they look up at you and go, wow, I wish I was you. And then when people ask you what you're doing and you describe it and they go, wow, that's really exciting. And you think, really? You're kind of feeling a bit bored with it? That means you're off purpose. And you can't reach that level of fulfillment without purpose. And here's what's interesting about it. Your passion will shift. Like people think passion and purpose are the same thing. They're not. They're vastly different. So people think they know their purpose because they know their passion. But it's different. And the example I give with this, again, to be very direct and to be, because, I'm so simple. As I say, if you were meant to do your passion for a living for the rest of your life, then I would be in the business of gynecology or bra fitting. Because at 15, that's exactly what I was passionate about. Like every 15-year-old straight boy. So passion is transitory. It moves through us. But purpose is deep. Purpose is soulful. Purpose is always there. And it's in the thread of what we're passionate about. But finding that part of us that wants to connect deeply with other human beings and serve them. And it's actually the amazing thing I love about it is when you're truly on purpose, you heal your own soul and you heal the soul of others while making a massive difference in the world and being so very successful.
Well, I love how you put that in. And I think that there's a lot of people that can learn about discovering more about themselves. Did you say something about sociopaths that they should stop reading at this point in your book? I was reading your book and I'm like, I love that. But they say a certain percentage of CEOs are, right?
Absolutely. The research showed that the number one career in the world for sociopaths is CEO. It's not even lawyers. Surprise.
It might be surgeons or yeah. Well, if you are going to be an authentic, there's no room for that. You're going to be about something bigger. Right. Yourself and your own ego. Well, how do you know what your purpose is? I mean, what do you tell people how to discover it?
There's several ways, and is it okay to give everybody a little exercise to help themselves with it?
Sure.
Fabulous. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you're dead and that you get to be floating around as some ethereal being at your own funeral. Have you been to a funeral? Diane, have you been to a funeral?
Yes, I have.
You've all been to funerals, right? And when you stand at a funeral, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the person delivering the eulogy has a job, and that job is to deify and canonize you.
Right.
So the person who's dead gets canonized. So if the person who's dead is Bob, and Bob was an ass all of his life, but he did something once, he did something nice, then the eulogy will be focused on that one thing.
Right.
And that's just what happens. We canonize the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine what they're saying at the front of the room that's so wonderful and kind and marvelous about you.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want you to do is I want you to float to the back of the room. Okay. I want you to float to the back pews where the people don't have to say nice things about you. Where the people in the back are going to say the things that you would absolutely hate them to say or fear that they would say, even if there's no real sense of why they would say that. So I'll give you mine. So at the front of the room, the people would say Dov was extremely courageous. He was very passionate. He was purpose-driven and committed to helping other people be on purpose so they could touch and live that deep greatness that lies dormant within us all to make a better world. That's what I would want them to say as they canonize Dov. But as they float to the back of the room and I listen to the pews, there's no reason for them to say this, but it's my fear, and fear is powerful if you use it right.
Mm-hmm.
And in the back pews, they're whispering, he was a freaking coward.
Yeah.
Every single day, I know my purpose is to be courageous in helping people to fulfill their purpose and live from that place of deep greatness. So you find your purpose, and this is what's interesting, I want everybody to grasp. Your purpose is always hidden behind your pain. The pain you don't want to look at is where your purpose is hidden. As Joseph Campbell said, the dark cave you fear looking into is where the treasure of who you are lays.
Well, that's really, that's insightful. And I'm curious, so okay, so you could figure out you don't want to be thought of as not courageous, but then what do you do at that point once you discover what it is?
Well, obviously every day I have to wake up and decide to be courageous, because I don't want to whisper in that shit at the back of the room. That's number one. So I've always got to be courageous. Mm-hmm. So what does being courageous means? I mean, I'm guessing, a different personality than many of the people you have on here. I know you have fabulous guests. Mm-hmm. I've actually looked at your guest list. You've had amazing people in there. I'm honored to be here. Mm-hmm. But to be courageous means, aside from anything else, I've not got to try and transform myself into who is the ideal guest for Diane. I've got to be me. Right. And that's often very courageous, because we live in a world where people are trying to tell us who we're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't wear the uniform. I've been speaking for 30 odd years. I have earrings that I've had since I was 15 years old. I don't wear a suit and tie. I do swear. Some of you might notice that. And it's not, none of it is for effect. Uh-huh. This is who I am. Mm-hmm. I care deeply. I care deeply about people. I care deeply about leadership. I care deeply about the difference we can all make. And me trying to be something else is a coward's way. So every day that challenge is for me to be courageous in saying what I believe is the truth that will make the greatest difference.
I'm curious, have you always been charismatic like this? Or was it something you had to develop as part of being a speaker?
That's a great question. Thank you. Mm-hmm. My wife still doesn't believe me, but my nature is that I'm actually shy. My wife still doesn't believe me. We've been together 20 years. She still doesn't believe me. I'm actually shy. I still feel shy. Mm-hmm. I still feel shyness. That's part of how I know it's courageous, because I'm actually, my natural tendency is to go into the room and not say anything and be quiet.
You know, it's interesting. Sometimes I feel the same way, but when you take a personality test, you probably come out as an extrovert, though, I would imagine, don't you?
No, I come out as an extroverted introvert.
Oh, yeah. On the scale, are you kind of in the middle of, like, between the two?
No, I've done all kinds of different tests, and that's the one that comes out, is that I'm naturally an introvert who has developed extrovert behavior. When I think about myself as a child, mm-hmm. You know, I was the kid who hid behind my mom's leg. Yeah. I wasn't the talkative one. I was never the cool kid in school. People didn't hang out with me. In fact, it was really interesting, because a relative of mine pointed out that when I was at school, my first couple of years in high school, so I was like 12 years old, everybody would come to me with their problems. And I remember saying to my mom, why do people keep asking me like I know? Like I was the psychologist at 12. Mm-hmm.
Well, you were meant to go into researching psychology, apparently, because you had a natural, yeah. You know, I think it's interesting that you like astrophysics. You mentioned physics or astrophysics? I can't remember.
Quantum physics.
Quantum physics. I am very interested in physics as well. We have a lot of things that we share in common. I was the shy one behind my mom and all that too. So I understand what you're saying. You can be in certain settings and show a certain type of personality. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of CEOs that are listening, who are listening to this show, that have to bring out a side to them that maybe isn't super comfortable when they're, I'm sure Zuckerberg doesn't revel in being in front of large crowds, for example. No. And, you know, how do you make yourself become more comfortable in that setting if it's not natural for you? I mean, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for asking. That's actually, thank you for asking something that people don't usually ask. That's really good. I appreciate that, because like you, I do thousands of interviews. And I think that it's got to be, it's very simple really, but it's got to be about something bigger than you. Mm-hmm. It's got to be something bigger than my fear or my anxiety. I mean, I have anxiety. I suffered with severe anxiety disorder for a long, long time, and depression and all those things. And you know what always brings me out is it's got to be about something bigger than me. I'm here to serve. That's number one. And I can't serve hiding behind my mom's leg, metaphorically or real. So what I've got to decide is that this is about something else bigger than me. And my advice to any leader that I work with is, if you can reveal the truth of who you are, including your shyness, if you can reveal that, you will bond people to you. One of the great lies we've learned is that vulnerability is a weakness. Vulnerability is your greatest strength. So if you're uncomfortable in front of the crowd, stand there and tell them that. And then share what you need to share. And people will welcome you. People are basically really good, kind, But I think people have a lower tolerance for BS than they've ever had. And that's great. So be real.
Well, I'm with you on, I think sometimes bringing out the elephant in the room, you spilled something on you or whatever, it's no big deal. And you just bring it up and make fun. I think people like a little self-deprecation. They can relate to you more sometimes if it's just a little bit here and there. And you just admit that, we're not perfect. And I think that there's so many leaders. I've had people on my show who've told me that, I wish I could look back at the numbers, but it was a pretty high number of leaders who really are in fear that people are going to discover that they don't know as much as people think they know.
More than 70% of high-level achievers in research have been shown to suffer from imposter syndrome.
That's a pretty high number. And is it that they put too high of expectations on themselves, or others are doing this? I mean, where is this high expectation coming from?
Again, great question. This is something that I do a lot of work with. I work one-on-one with leaders who are at that very high level, and that is so common, that imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to think about it at a basic level. Everybody you meet feels like they don't quite know enough, that there's something missing in them, that they didn't quite get the memo. Mm-hmm. And I train people to be speakers as well. And one of the things that I work with individuals, with CEOs who want to be speakers, and one of the things I say to them is, you got to understand that they, meaning your audience, they don't know you. So you've got to let them in. And part of letting them in is sharing what it is you don't know. That allows you to show what you do know. Mm-hmm. Don't ask me about accounting. I don't know anything about it. And if you put me in charge of your accounts, it's going to be a mess.
Right.
That's the simplicity of it. Don't ask me to do a lot of things that are not my area. But there are things where I'm really, I have my own level of genius, as do each of us. And it's I think that as leaders in the old conditioning, I know it's from where I grew up, was as a leader, you're supposed to know everything. Mm-hmm. And that's a big fat lie.
It's impossible.
As a leader, I think we actually are a little bit contradictory to most people. I think we do need to be more generalist. Mm-hmm. I think we've been taught to be in a niche and all the rest of it, and that's fine. But you've also got to have a reasonable grasp of the rest.
Right.
So there are things where you're going to shine in maybe 3, 4, 5 places. You can't shine in all the places. But you've also got to say, listen, I'm not that great at this.
Yeah.
Bob, can you give me some insight on that? Diane, can you help me with this? That, again, that vulnerability builds enormous strength. And it's amazing because it takes that, I don't know enough. Mm-hmm. It takes it away. And then you start to shine for what is really brilliant in you.
And I think you could develop that well-roundedness in the people that report to you, who report to you, if you push them a little bit in certain areas, give them a little more responsibility. But I think that also I found that I don't like to make people do things that aren't necessary just because they haven't done it and I think a lot of leaders do that. They try to push people past their limits. What do you think about that?
That's a great insight, because I think, this whole thing around playing to people's strengths, I think, is vitally important. And, mm-hmm. For those of us who have a background in psychology, we were always trying to fix shit. No, I'm not fixing anything anymore. There's nothing to fix. And I actually fully, deeply believe that now. There's nothing to fix. Uh-huh. What we need to do is bring up what's great. Now, there's things that you want to bring up yourself that feel weak. Mm-hmm. That's a different story than somebody going, you need to do this. No, mm-hmm. We've got to work. We've got to play to people's strengths. Mm-hmm. And I think there are things that you need in life. So I don't need to be brilliant at every form of mathematics, but I need to be able to add and subtract and maybe even multiply. But maybe I don't need in what it is that I do. I don't need trigonometry.
Right. So
I think you've got to look at what do you actually need and, build the strengths on that. But play to your strengths. We spend so much time. This is where that inadequacy comes from. That feeling of not being enough comes from constantly looking at, I'm not good enough here. Well, my question is always this: do you need to be? There's a wonderful story of Henry Ford when he first started the Ford company, and he was brought in front of Congress because the government gave him a massive contract that was like $5 million which of course in those days was gigantic. And he had to go in front of Congress to prove that he could do it. Mm-hmm. And so he was standing there and they said, well, one of the congressmen said, well, Mr. Ford, I'm not sure that you have the financial background, to take on a deal like this. And he just looked at him and said, I don't. But I hired Tom, and Tom's the best in the business. Can you speak, Tom? And Tom spoke, and then he said, well, we're not sure if you have enough understanding of the industry. And he says, I don't. And that's why I hired Deborah, and Deborah does. Whoever it was, whatever the names were. And it was that's what made Ford a brilliant leader, is he understood he didn't have to know it all.
Right.
He understood, hire the best, make them loyal to you. And as Branson said, train people so well that they can leave you, and treat them so well that they won't.
That's great. Yeah, it really is. And, a lot of the things that you maybe hate right now, you find you might like later. That's one of the good things about getting old is I wish I had paid more attention in that statistics class 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then you find new interests that change. So I agree with what you're saying. And I think there's so many things that people can experience through each job change, that they've learned something a little bit differently and they get different mentors. I mean, as far as mentors go, I'm curious what you think. Do you think that you should just align yourself with one mentor at a time, or do you think it's good to have multiple mentors, or how do you look at that?
Thank you. For me, I've always had mentors. I deeply believe in mentorship. And by the way, I will say, when I say mentors, I've had mentors who have mentored me because that's what they chose to do. Yeah. And I have mentors that I have paid, and I have no problem paying to have a mentor. And I always have at least two at any time. But I don't have more than one in an area, because that's just confusing.
Right.
So I have multiple mentors in multiple areas of my life. So if you're looking at having better relationships, then you probably need a mentor who specializes in that, or somebody who you recognize, you look at and you go, wow, they really understand it. Great. Mm-hmm. Don't ask your mate. Listen, you're asking your daft friend down the road who's gone through 3 divorces how to have a better relationship. Don't ask the homeless person for investing advice. I mean, this is one of the things that people don't get. Well, I talked to my friend. Your friend's an idiot in that area. Right. Your friend might be a wonderful person in another area. So mentorship is vitally important.
Right.
But you've got to invest in yourself. Mm-hmm. And all too often, we don't invest in our people enough. I've got CEOs that I mentor who are now saying to their team, we're going to put you with Dov. You got to work with Dov. And they're like, well, I'm not sure. You don't have the choice. You got to go do that. Mm-hmm. And you're going to do it for 6 sessions. And after that, you can make the choice yourself. Right. And they go, and then they go through 6 sessions like, oh, this is not what I expected. Mm-hmm. Because people create a framework in their head.
They do.
And it's so far from the truth. We are so much greater than we can ever realize. There's so much beauty and magnificent brilliance and genius within us, but we keep looking at the world by what's wrong with me? How am I a deficit? You're not. You're magnificent. Tapping into that, you bring your gift to the world, and you heal your own soul, and you heal the soul of everybody you touch. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. I mean that deep part of you that's crying out to live your purpose.
Well, I can't think of a better place to take a break and think about how people can do that by maybe finding information in your books and your sites and all that, because you really have some great information, Dov. I loved watching your talks. And if anybody's looking for a motivational speaker, boy, do you motivate. And I thought it was amazing. But please share with everybody. Tell them the name of your book and your sites and everything, because the book was great. I loved it, by the way.
Thank you very much. I deeply appreciate that. Like I said, this is the book. It's called Fiercely Loyal, and it's how high-performing companies develop and retain top talent. Of course, as we said, it was really focused on authentic leadership, particularly in the context of a changing generation of millennials who are coming in and who are entering the workforce, and already the largest workforce in the history. So it's a very different way of looking at leadership. And, it talks about vulnerability being your greatest power. You can find out more about me, of course, at fullmontyleadership.com. Thank you, Diane, for mentioning it earlier. Mm-hmm. Fullmontyleadership.com. There you can find access to all of my blogs. There's over 400 articles on there. You can find my podcast. My podcast is Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. It's the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 listeners globally, which is pretty cool. And Inc. made us the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So those are pretty decent ones. Of course, as you said, there's a YouTube channel, Dov Baron, Full Monty Leadership. There, you can find out all of those things. I can go on forever. All those things, I write for Entrepreneur, etc. You can find me. Just go to fullmontyleadership.com and all the access to all those things is there. And I'm very happy to be of service to you. You can find out about my speaking and my consulting one-on-one. But, here's the thing, and I want to say this to you, and I know most people think I'm nuts for doing this, but I'm going to give you my private email, and I'll tell you why. Because Diane takes the time. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I know because I have a podcast that I've been doing for 10 years. Mm-hmm. This stuff, it doesn't happen overnight. This is stuff you have to work on, and you put a lot of time and energy, and Diane puts a ton of effort. I mean, I've seen the list of these amazing guests that you bring on. You give your time, they give their time. If you are listening, watching this, then you need to reach out to Diane and tell her what you got out of it. Not just out of my episode, but any of the episodes. Let her know. She needs to know that. We're all human beings. We all need to know that what we're doing makes a difference. Let her know that you got out of the show. Let her know what you're going to do with it. And write to me. My email is Dov, D-O-V, at DOVBARON.com. Dov at dovbaron.com. Write to me. Tell me what you got out of this show with Diane. Tell me how you've used it, and tell me how I can help you. I'm happy to do that. Totally. I'll give you 20 minutes of my time, and we can chat, and I'll just see if I can serve you. And if I can't, I'll be the first to tell you. You've got to actually feed back. You can't do this passively. We all think, listen to podcasts in the background. Stop being passive. Get active in your own growth, your own development. It makes all the difference.
Awesome, Dov. Thank you so much. It was so fun. This time just flew by, and I could have talked to you all day about this, and I really enjoyed it. And I hope everybody does reach out to Dov because he is amazing. And we are going to take a break, and we'll be back right after this.